So I'm so excited to be here. I'm actually very honored to be here with you to discuss a really crucial idea. It's an issue that I've been researching and I've been writing about for more than a decade. The persistent and troubling link between race and notions of intelligence or ability. As rapid scientific advancements have empowered us to edit genomes and select embryos, these old kind of prejudices have been reemerging. And we continue spreading these super reductive ideas, tying one's biology or their genes to their potential worth. I've extensively studied genetics and race and intelligence, and I've written multiple books on this, as Hillary was saying. And time and again, despite genetic advances and science proving otherwise, we've had these dangerous and divisive beliefs persisting across societies all over the world, saying that intelligence is inherently tied to our genetics, and in particular to our racial identity, that some races or others are more intelligent or less intelligent than others. As I was preparing to write my last book, my most recent book, my attention turned to spaces of genetic selection, embryo selection, these kinds of new technologies. And through these technologies, things like CRISPR, you might have heard of that, we now have this unprecedented ability to edit genes and to select certain traits. And it's in a way that I really thought was just helping us end debilitating diseases. Really, in the beginning, these technologies were touted as giving us the potential or the chance to end blood disorders, things that were so painful and that required multiple blood transfusions over people's lifetimes. And, yet over the past few years, I've watched as instead these advances have been used to select for preferred mental and physical traits or mental abilities. And they've become a way for people with financial means to select the sex of their babies. And not long after the choice of sex selection for your babies came this idea of selecting for intelligence. Companies that are not very far from where I live in New Jersey, not far from where I'm actually raising my own children, are offering people the chance to, or at least they're marketing this ability to select for higher intelligence. This just shocked me. History shows that our first impulse has been to leverage these ideas in order to manifest prejudices, to use these tools around gender and now race and intelligence. As agencies offer these services to evaluate these embryos for so-called higher intelligence, we stand at the edge of this slippery slope. That's always resulted in really ethically questionable, if not morally repugnant kind of uses. And all really rooted in this enduring myth of racial hierarchies of ability. Now, before we dig more deeply into my book, I'd just like to start by telling you a bit about myself and how I came to have this deep interest in intelligence to begin with. So I grew up in an immigrant community in Los Angeles. My mom is an immigrant. She came here from Indonesia, and she came to this country seeking opportunity. She wanted to make a better life for herself, and she saw education as a way to succeed. My success in school was measured, probably just like yours was, by my grades, my test scores, and my mom actually placed great importance in these scores. It was really how the system was measuring me, and she saw that as my potential worth, my potential ability to succeed, where I was going to end up in life. I took my first big test at age 5, and it was a test to get into a special magnet school. And I knew that it was important, but when the results came to our house, I realized that I hadn't made the cut. My scores just weren't high enough. And I saw my mom cry. It was the first time I saw her cry. My second big test came just a year later for a gifted program within my school. And, I hadn't changed. The same little Rina sat down to take the same actually nearly identical tests. And, did I magically become someone new and different in order to pass this test? Of course not. My biology didn't change in that time, but somehow I did pass this test. And I realized, there's something fishy here. My latest book, Rethinking Intelligence, explores the connections that our society makes between intelligence and race, especially based in this educational system, our public education system, and private schools as well, that overvalue our test scores. But the inequities that are created and perpetuated in systems in so many areas of our lives by this belief are not limited to race. As I was saying, gender is also always tied to race, to intelligence as well. And we see this in the results of test takers, people coming from historically marginalized backgrounds, female identifying groups, when we see these tests being taken and the scores coming out. But what we know is that it's not the genetics of a Black or a brown person or a woman or a female identifying person or a female gendered person, right? That's not what predicts whether someone's smart or not. So I'd like to read a short selection from my book about IQ tests that really illustrates this point further. Test analysts find that in addition to scoring us on cultural membership, IQ tests score us on privilege. Test takers from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, those who live in poverty, those who endure toxic stress and those who live in toxic environments, those who are just living in unsafe realities perform worse on tests. Meanwhile, test takers who enjoy health and wealth, people who eat nutritious foods, breathe clean air, feel safe, and they're undistracted when they take these tests, of course they perform better. Even giving children simple nutritional supplements, multivitamins, vitamins and minerals and all of these kinds of things has boosted IQ scores. And as intelligence scientist Richard Nisbett has shown, test takers that are adopted into a higher socioeconomic status often gain up to 20 IQ points. That's enough to bump you up into another intelligence bracket. So there's also a great deal of work that's been done by intelligence researcher Angela Duckworth, who reveals that IQ tests measure how much a person wants to do well on their test. So that's their motivation level. When you incentivize test takers to perform well by giving them money, for example, their IQ scores go up significantly. And this is held true for other cognitive tests that put a fixed number on aptitude. Also, further research into social motivations has likewise shown us that cultural expectations and parental expectations have a lot to do with our scores. So people have been taught or coached to value intelligence tests and scores, do better on these tests. And IQ tests are really just measuring this kind of thing, the belief in the merit of the test itself, but that's tied up in cultural membership and also privilege. The kind of social status of our parents, our educators, our caregivers, our relations, all of that is getting kind of lobbed together into our scores. Research has also shown us that affective states, like what researchers will call task anxiety, affect a test taker's score. People who are told that their brains are plastic and that they can do infinitely well on tests tend to do better on tests. Meanwhile, people who are presented with reminders of their imminent failure, such as when researchers prime female and or racial minoritized test takers about their gender or their race and about stereotypes about them, have been shown to significantly diminish their test scores. And just being asked, what is your race before taking a test, can really drive down a minoritized person's test scores. This is because women and minorities have been told their whole lives that their gender and their race is an impediment to scoring well or having a high IQ. So in the end, IQ tests score people on their self-perceptions and their belief in themselves and their internalized sense of their own worth. And that is all set by the prejudices and the misconceptions that are held in our society. So when you hear that IQ correlates to how far a person's going to get in life, their income level, their job status, their education level, it's because the tests are actually a filter for that. IQ tests confer higher scores on people who are already tracked well to perform in these areas. Tests don't actually tell us how well a person is at using new information, how well they are at solving problems, how well they are at making decisions. They tell us nothing about how valuable a person's score could be or how variable it would be based on if they were coached or they were consulted the way that some families do, or how much they would improve if they had all the right resources their whole lives. All of those cultural and substantive resources at their disposal their whole entire lives. Now, I'm an educator who's working in a system that is teaching my students and all of the people that I work with that their test scores, their IQ scores, their test scores determine how smart they actually are. And I often find myself having to intervene in these false narratives. And I really see how these narratives bind my students and actually prevent them from achieving. But I'm actually also a parent of 3 young children. And they're, one of them's in preschool, 2 of them are in early elementary school. And I really believe that we as a society need to change the way that we define intelligence and disinvest in this score-based kind of definition and this system of inequality. And I worry that disinvestment won't come soon enough for my kids. So I discuss this in my book in this passage as well. So in the state of New Jersey, again, where I live, aptitude tests are administered to certain K-12 grades at the start and the finish of each year and given to all students in grades 3 through 8 at the end of the year. So I'm certain that the teachers, I actually know for a fact the teachers don't want to spend the year teaching to the test. They don't want to do that. But they must prepare my kids and all the students in the school for taking these tests. That's their responsibility. That means that they're using everyone's time to focus on the test material and not other kinds of material. And it also means that my kids and their peers are losing out on the opportunity to learn in a progressive and collaborative way that's best for their developing brains. This is the way that my preschooler still is learning. So they're losing that child-led, student-centered, inquiry-based form of learning that has been with them up until now. A recent study examining the effectivity of free public pre-K programs has shed some light on the detriments of the score-based paradigm that I'm talking about and standardized testing in general, especially in terms of the loss of student-centered learning. In a decade-long longitudinal study of a free public pre-K program in Tennessee, it was a statewide program in Tennessee that was designed to help students from low socioeconomic backgrounds to access, good education pre-K. Researchers found that this program, however well-intentioned, because it was well-intentioned, had a significant negative effect on the students. Instruction was focused on teacher-centered, basic reading, science, math, and using that teacher-centered learning style that, in which students were basically lectured for long periods of time, and they were disciplined in order to, sit still to receive the lectures. And in the end, the researchers found that this model resulted in students progressively testing worse as they moved through their K-12 education. And the researchers' takeaway was that Introducing the K-12 score-based kind of standardized culture of education was really harmful to the children. Based on their prior decades of research, they additionally surmised that small children are developmentally allergic, those were their words, to this kind of teacher-centered learning. And also all of the disciplinary habits that were embedded in it. Their conclusion was that early childhood education should be a place of curiosity and discovery, a place where, children could learn about things that were interesting to them in connection to their environments, about themselves, and to thereby grow intellectually and emotionally as well. It should not be a place where a child learns that their value, especially their only value, is in performing to a kind of test, right? Performing their aptitude. And this research, for me, begs the question, when is the right time to kickstart the standardization and the scoring? The scientists here, they look to other free public pre-K programs that have done better, and they found that some of these better funded programs have avoided the bereft teacher-centered kind of learning style and the standardization embedded in that Tennessee program. And as a result, they recommend that schools and school districts in particular going forward hire teachers that are well-versed in early childhood education, in the kind of student-based, child-based, kind of learning, and not people who are just fresh off of certification, the march towards that K-12 certification. And they suggest that we postpone the score-based and standardized kind of education for another time. But of course, still looking at my own kids' path ahead, I fear that this question really poses a fallacy. Instead of asking when, I actually want to know why. Why would I as a parent want my kids to go through this? Or why would my kids as emerging learners benefit from this? Why would they want this kind of curriculum? Why would they need to be test prepping instead of creative and collaboratively learning? And another way of asking the question is just to say how. So how does this benefit my kids? How does this grow and develop them to be a better version of themselves and to be better learners to their best potential? Well, I can imagine a number of reasons to assess my child's portfolio against their past or recent progress, and looking at change over time in order to measure that progress and see how they're doing. And while I would want my kids to be tested for any learning challenges such as dyslexia or information overload, any kind of issues that are arising that are preventing them from feeling like successful learners, I would want that. But I can't imagine how it would benefit them to measure them against another child in their class, against all the kids in their school, against all the kids in their district, or all the kids their own age, which is what intelligence tests do. I'd really much rather have them working their growth mindset, their collaborative learning muscle, their connected and mindful learning muscles, and learning and building their knowledge base by asking questions that are important to them, that are exciting to them as they progress through elementary school. My kids are growing up in systems that are attempting to measure their intelligence through a test. And what I worry about the most for them is that they're learning that their value as people is in these scores. And I'm worried that they're learning the misconceptions, the misconceptions of intelligence all the while. In our work to create this kind of quantifiable measure of intelligence, something fixed that we can know that's that person, we've created a culture that equates worth with numerical performance, perpetuating a very narrow and flawed kind of understanding of our human potential. Scores on standardized tests shouldn't serve as the sole determinant of an individual's worth. And yet many of you here tonight have likely measured yourselves and probably that of the people around you in terms of scores at some point, right? And of course, my intention isn't to say that you're the problem, only that you're the product of a system that's harmed you. Think about it. It's likely that many of you spent a great deal of your educational career like getting ready for the SATs, the ACTs, right? And just to get into this university or one that's like it. And when you saw your score, how did it make you feel? Was it high enough that it garnered praise and everybody's like, oh, you've got that high score. Did you feel valuable and accomplished? Or was it lower than you expected or lower than you wanted it to be? Did it make you feel like a failure or just doomed to do better next time, maybe? Or not get into the school that you wanted to get into, or, what a place that would ultimately help you reach your dreams. During the COVID-19 pandemic, colleges and universities across this country actually disinvested from the system of scoring people and from accepting or rejecting students based on these very tests, right? The pandemic, and this school was one of them. And so was my school that I teach at now, Rutgers University. The pandemic made it so difficult for people to gather. How are you going to test them? How are you going to measure their, how are you going to collect the scores? So instead, we got rid of them. And some of the most highly regarded schools in this country did this. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, you name it. And our most important state schools as well. Marshall, Rutgers, all of these schools that are really like the place where the next generation come up to fulfill their dreams, right? So we decided that the scores weren't that necessary. And yet, as we've returned to a state of seemingly post-COVID normal, many of these institutions of higher education are reinstating the SATs and the ACTs, all those entrance requirements. And they're reinvesting in the system that makes us think that we're less than if we don't measure up, right? If we don't perform to those levels. But we know that these tests are not a good predictor of how well we're going to do in life or how well we're going to perform even at school. The tests are just a direct reflection of how much privilege we have. And people with financial means can and are coached to perform better within this system. That is inherently unfair. It's inherently inequitable that you can pay to do better on a test and that people do that all the time. My book, however, isn't just about standardized testing and test scores and all of that. It's also about changing our perception of how we think of intelligence. In my book in here tonight, I really would like to ask you to do this with me, to rethink intelligence, to rethink how you define intelligence. I'd like to ask you to challenge these traditional, outdated definitions and to join me in a new way of not only, defining not just your own intelligence, but, that of all the people around us, all of us. I define intelligence simply as this: learning from your environment. And of course, of seeing those opportunities to do so. We've been taught to think of intelligence as this kind of fixed thing, right? Something within us that's just kind of stagnant and unchanging. But really what the research that I've been looking at over the past couple of decades into our genetics has shown us is that our genes give us the brain structures that allow us to think. They allow thinking to occur. They guide the process. Our genes, however, have nothing to do with the actual quality of our thoughts. And what we know about our brains is that they're always growing and changing as well. While the rate of that growth over time may change with age, of course, the growth itself doesn't actually stop. It doesn't stop during our lifetimes. And that means that we always have the ability to learn. When we shift from thinking about intelligence as an object to a journey, then we're better able to optimize that whole process, and we can become more effective thinkers and learners. Intelligence is something that we do. It's not something that is. Even for you sitting here in this room today, no matter your gender, your race, your age, what I want you to know is that you still have the opportunity to learn. You still have that opportunity to nurture your intelligence. No matter what a standardized test has told you about yourself. Not when you were in elementary school like me when I was little, or when you applied to college, like I saw many of you shaking your heads. Yes, I remember that SAT prep, that ACT prep, right? That's why in the context of this discussion, I really want to offer you some tips on how you can nurture your intelligence and how you can grow it now. Tangible steps that you can take today. So tip number 1 is that I want you to work to shift your mindset from being, dumb or a failure to one that says, I have an opportunity to learn. I see in human intelligence our infinite potential to learn and to grow. But we have to seize the learning moments that come before us. Sometimes these are big moments, sometimes they're small moments. Every day our brains are giving us this opportunity to create new networks, like new neural pathways, and to become smarter. But we have to take those opportunities when we can. So one thing to do is seize the opportunity to learn from anybody around you. Parents, educators, we watch our kids do this. We watch them do so excitedly, and it's just, it's magical to see that. Maybe we can't do as much learning as, my 5-year-old or something, but we can choose singular moments that we can take that learning on, and we can do so with excitement and wonder. We can. Whether it's from your own parent or your sibling or other students around you, teachers, whatever, your mentors, friends, there's always that possibility to learn from others around you. But I'm also a realist, and I know that we can't even begin to do this until we have a healthy mind, and that depends on having a healthy environment, actually, which leads me to tip number 2, which is that in any way that you can, work to lower the stress in your environment. And I know this sounds like a very, far-fetched and privileged thing to say. There's so many things that we as individuals can't control. We can't always control our workplace culture, the culture of our schools, classrooms even, or the elements of our jobs. We can't control everything, right? And when you add to this all the layers of racism and sexism and, heteronormativity, homophobia, gender binarism, the list goes on, and it's pervasive. It pervades all of the institutions and organizations and spheres that we find ourselves in every day. It may seem like really hard to do this, but I still ask you to try to find those places where you can make a change, and know that when you fight for change in your social environment, in your workplace, in your school, classroom, wherever, when you take on the stress, because that is a stressful thing in the short term, of fighting inequality, you are creating a better environment for all people, especially minoritized people who are suffering from, all of that weight. And that creates a space that we can all grow healthier in. And my third and final tip, so tip number 3, is to just take it one day at a time. Intelligence, it's a process. And the beauty of being a human being is that learning and growing our intelligence is just what we do naturally. Without even being aware of it, we're doing it. And it continues throughout our whole lives. But that growth takes time. And that's why I ask you to take it one small step at a time. There will always be days that we face challenges and we just feel like we need to just rest. And actually, learning is done best when you learn a little bit and you rest a lot, and then you learn a little bit more and you rest a lot more. So, know that every moment it's an opportunity to change and to learn something. You always have this chance to think about this thing or change that thing. You also have a chance to take a break, though, right? And when you don't achieve, whether it's a small goal or something bigger, instead of feeling like a failure or calling yourself a failure in your mind, just choose to see the potential in yourself and in others. And recognize that this is just one day. This is just one opportunity. There are so many myriad other opportunities. Tomorrow, you'll always have the opportunity to nurture your intelligence further. Human intelligence is totally multifaceted, encompassing such a wide range of skills and talents and experiences, really, that extend so far beyond the confines of a test booklet. By uncoupling our perception of human value from those rigid metrics, we open the door to a much more inclusive and equitable society, one that celebrates the diverse strengths of all the people within it, and one that can help all of us to individually grow and learn and live out our true potential, and to help all of us to improve those environments so that we can all do that. I'm really excited to continue this conversation with you, and I would like to do so today and into the future. I really use these platforms to share regular tips on ways you can grow and nurture your own intelligence, and ways that you can find, easy daily opportunities to grow. And it's also where I will be sharing my next book, which will delve more deeply into our misconceptions about race and genetics. So you can expect that book in 2025. Thank you so much.